This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Simon Woodside, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show. Hi, I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories, and welcome to episode 611 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing Roger Zelazny's classic novel Roadmarks, about a magical highway that runs through time and space. And this will include spoilers for everything in the book, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by two guests. So first up, we've got Tom Gerencer, making his 39th appearance on the show. He's the author of the business book Think Like Google, the short story collection Intergalactic Refrigerator Repairmen Seldom Carry Cash, and the popular science book How It's Made, which he wrote for the Discovery Channel. His middle grade novel The Magic Ski Mountain is out now. So Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Glad to be back.
And also joining us today is Rajan Khanna, making his 29th appearance on the show. He's the author of the post-apocalyptic novels Falling Sky, Rising Tide, and Raining Fire, and his short fiction appears in magazines such as Analog, Asimov's, Clark's World, and Beneath Ceaseless Skies. He's also a game designer whose work appears in books such as Tome of Heroes, Monster Vault, and Dungeons and Ruins from Kobold Press. So, Raj, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Always happy to be back.
All right, so we're going to start off with Raj and have you tell us about your history reading Roger Zelazny.
Okay. I was thinking about this before the podcast, and my first encounter wasn't until college. I think the first thing I read of his was A Rose for Ecclesiastes in a science fiction class I took in college. And I seem to recall that we might have ended up reading Lord of Light later, which is, I love that novel too. But the main thing for me, which I know Dave, was in college also. My girlfriend at the time, I was at her house, her family house, and looking for something to read because I was staying there for the weekend. And she had these old, science fiction book club sort of like collections of the first 5 of the Amber books. And there was, I think one was yellow and one was green, and they both had the same picture on the cover, which was just like some old school sword and sorcery guy with a sword and a big tiger or some kind of cat creature.
And, like a bare-chested guy.
Yeah, exactly. Like that, like not really in fitting with what I think of those books anyway. But I thought, let me give this a try. And she hadn't read them. And it was the minute I started reading it, I was hooked. And like, there's still some of my favorite books ever. And it's like, I love Zelazny. I like the way he writes. I love the kind of things he's into. But something about the Amber book specifically just felt like it was so me. It was everything that I wanted in a book. I mean, obviously I have some, not obviously, but I have some, critiques of it, and it comes from a very specific time, but I reread those books over and over and over again. So he is one of my favorite writers because of that. And then I've gone back and read some of his other books, but I had never actually read Roadmarks before. I have some of his stuff that I think I've been holding off on reading because now that he's dead, there's a limited amount. And so I sort of parcel it out to myself, I think. But this was a great excuse to kind of go back and take a look at one of the things I hadn't read. But he is definitely one of my favorite writers of all time.
Yeah. And I mean, if anyone doesn't know, I mean, I'm a huge Amber fan. I proposed to my wife on the road leading up to the ski basin in Santa Fe because it's one of the locations featured in the Amber series. And, we named our daughter Taryn Amber Kirtley as a reference to the Amber book. So yeah, I'm about as big of an Amber fan as it gets. And the books are, they're sort of, as you say, they're sort of inconsistent. He was writing them fast, and some of the books are better than others, and so on. But yeah, I just love them more than I could even say. So So yeah, and Tom and I have talked a lot about Roger Zelazny, and we did a 2.5 hour review recently of the new short story collection, The Best of Roger Zelazny, that came out from the SF Masterworks series. So yeah, we're all big Roger Zelazny fans here, but none of us had ever read Roadmarks before. I don't think, right? Tom, you'd never read this before, right?
I I don't know if I had read it. It might have been in like a previous, like an avenue that's now been closed off or something. But no, I don't think I did. But I got really into Zelazny in my college years, and I remember having a copy of it, and I suspect that I read the first few chapters and kind of lost interest and decided I didn't like it, which was a shame. But yeah, no, I'm a huge Zelazny fan. I'll say I got into reading science fiction novels when my mom, who was great at finding cool books. She found me a copy of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't know why she thought I would like that, but she was a big Vonnegut fan. She would be reading like Cat's Cradle and be like, "This book is crazy. Let me tell you about it." And I'd be like, "That sounds nuts." When I was in like, 5th grade or something. And then she ended up buying me Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And after that, I was always searching for somebody else who was like Douglas Adams. And I found Robert Sheckley and I found Roger Zelazny just by going through used bookstores and looking in the science fiction section and just pulling out every book I could and looking at the cover and thinking, reading the book, the back, description on the jacket and thinking, I wonder if I would like this. And I can't remember which Zelazny book I found first, but whichever one it was, the one that stuck with me the most was Doorways in the Sand. And that one, it's one of those weird books for me that when I read a book that I like that much, I just reread it over and over and over again, which is kind of like a sickness with me. But that book, I've probably read it 50 times in my life. Because, like once a year, once every 6 months or something, I'd be like, oh, I want to read that book again. I love that book. And so I would just read it again. And at some point, go ahead, Dave.
Well, yeah, I've read some of the Amber books 50 times for sure.
Okay. All right.
And I guess I'll say, that Roger Zelazny has different modes that he writes in, so the Amber books are like hard-boiled fantasy, basically. But Doorways in the Sand and Roadmarks are much closer to Douglas Adams. It's, the sort of wacky humor mode that he did as well. So, I could see that kind of, roadway from Douglas Adams to Robert Sheckley to Roger Zelazny.
Right. Although I will say that Zelazny is more lyrical. He's more, he really was a huge fan of poetry. I think he wanted to be a poet. I think we discussed this in the other panel. But you couldn't make money off being a poet. So he's like, well, I'm going to write novels and short stories when I would put a lot of poetry in them. And you can, and I just love it. Like the feeling I get from reading Zelazny, from his, just like looking at his words on the page and scanning them, and the feeling of them going into your brain is so cool that I almost don't even care about the story, although obviously I do. I find Doorways in the Sand to be such a fantastic book in that regard. And also I just love the story. And then always looked for other books by him. And then you, Dave, at one point turned me onto the Amber series, and I read that, and it didn't hit with me I loved it, but it didn't hit with me the same way, to where I was like, oh, I got to read that again and again and again. But I did definitely enjoy it. And then Roadmarks, I feel like I picked up at some point when I was young and read some of it and didn't get through it until this panel, when I was like, oh, I gotta push through this, and then found it to be really delightful, especially toward the end. It kind of builds.
Well, I remembered knowing it. I'd never read Roadmarks before, but I kind of was aware of its existence. But my impression of it, not having read it, was like, oh, this is just gonna like a copy of like a not as good copy of Amber. Mm-hmm. That's sort of what I was expecting it to be. So I never really went out of my way to read it. And it seems like people didn't really say it was. I never heard anyone saying like, oh, that's my favorite Zelazny book or anything like that. So. And Raj, you said that you had a copy of it just kind of like lying around, right? That you had never read.
I think so. I mean, like he's one of those people. There's certain authors that if I'm in a secondhand store or somewhere and I see a book of theirs, I'll just grab it. And especially because and sometimes I forget which ones I have, so I end up with multiple copies. I actually think with Roadmarks, and I couldn't find it. I went looking for it, and and maybe it's packed away somewhere, but I think I did. Maybe it was like a KGB bar reading series from New York City, raffle or something, and or some other thing. I remember I got a signed, I think it was a signed book and maybe it was Trent who had put it up or something like that, but I couldn't find it when I went back to look for it. So yeah. But I was like you, I was aware that it existed, there's.
Wait, sorry, you're saying Trent Zelazny?
Yeah. I think he put it up as an charity auction thing, either to help the reading series or maybe it was something else. And I happened to win it. And that was one of the things that I got. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Wait, so you have a signed copy of Roadmarks?
I don't know if it was signed by Roger or if it was signed by Trent.
All right.
And honestly, like, I'm now like, where is this book and what did I do with it? I probably tried to stick it somewhere like safe and forgot where it was. It's in a box in my basement, possibly. But
if people don't know, Trent is or was Roger's son. He died unfortunately recently.
Oh, he did. I didn't know that.
Man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He had, I think he'd had a stroke and
boy.
then he was taking Tylenol and just like overdosed on Tylenol.
How old was he?
He was like my age, like 47 or something like that.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
I talked, Warren Lapine, who I interviewed recently, he became like best friends with him. And so we talked about that, on, it was the episode about the, Roger Zelazny's writing advice, if anyone wants more details about that. But I was going to say, though, about, that, like Roger didn't sign it, but Trent signed it. That made me think about a thing where Roger Zelazny and Samuel R. Delaney, because their names sound somewhat similar, I guess, like people were constantly mixing them up with each other. So they just had an agreement that either of them could sign books for either of them, just to make it easier.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so you had, so you'd never read, so none of us had ever read Roadmarks before. So I guess, and this is like a really hard book to summarize the storyline. This is a really like gonzo out there, book. I was thinking maybe like the easiest way to summarize the plot is I think I'll actually start with Randy, the Randy character, who's the son of Red, who's really the main character. But so Randy's story is a little bit easier to get a handle on. So Randy is a 20-year-old guy or so, and he has never known his father. His father got his mom pregnant and disappeared and never knew that Randy existed. Randy is living in Ohio, and he's always wished that he could know his father, and the only sort of connection to his father he has is a copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass that his father left behind. And so one day, Randy is paging through the book and just reading his father had underlined certain passages, and so he's just kind of reading some of these passages out loud. And one of them activates the book, which it turns out, in addition to being a physical copy of Leaves of Grass, is also this kind of like self-aware AI computer thing. And so it goes by Leaves, for Leaves of Grass. And so Leaves tells him that there's this thing called the Road, capital R, which is like this highway that goes through time and space. And there are all these little turnoffs that go to pretty much any possibility in time and space that you can imagine. And certain people have the ability to only certain, like a small number of people have the ability to find the road and navigate it. And so she kind of like, so they get in his car and she tells him how to get onto the road. And that's kind of where his storyline starts. So let's just start with that idea of the road. So Raj, what did you think of this idea of the road that goes through time and space?
I mean, I thought it was a cool idea. I think that you started at a different part than the book starts, but I mean, that idea is presented pretty early on and seems to be like that central part of the book that you're like, okay, this is what's going on. There are all these people who are on this road. They're traveling between different timelines. I will say that, Zelazny seems very unconcerned with like defining how the rules of the road work beyond a certain element. Because you're talking about time, but you're also, like you said, you were, wisely bringing up that it goes through space as well. So it seems to be kind of connecting all these different like historical periods or moments. So, it can be, 20th century America, but also, ancient Egypt, and Mohenjo-Daro is mentioned toward the end. But I love that concept, and I love the idea of sort of being able to, all these, the people who can make it to the road are all from different time periods, but they sort of learn that there are all these other time periods and sort of interact. I kind of found that part really charming, even though, would a guy from the 12th century like be able to kind of connect with people from the 20th century? But they kind of figure it out, I guess. And like you said, there's only certain people who can access the road in the first place. But just, I won't, go on a long diatribe. But what I found interesting was that there are certain elements to it that did remind me of Amber, at least the idea behind Amber. Like, for example, that, there were certain places on the road that, might get changed. History might change, or the timeline might shift, and they're no longer accessible anymore. Or you have to sometimes find a ramp that leads to a certain time, and maybe you can get there by altering different things. And that reminded me of, the whole idea of shadows and trying to find a certain place. You have to sort of, work your way there in a way, and maybe it's not necessarily the same as when you were there the first time. But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, no, the idea is obviously very similar to Amber. There's a quote by Zelazny where he said, "I wanted to do for time in Roadmarks what I had done with space in Amber." But I mean, because it moves through time and space, the distinction is sort of muddled to me. I mean, it seems fairly similar in a lot of ways. Which is fine with me. I mean, that's my favorite idea of all time, is the idea of shadow walking in Amber. So I don't mind if he recycles it. And yeah, I just want to underline, as you say, that there's this idea that if you go back in time and change something, it doesn't change the road, but it like creates a new like exit on the road. And the more people travel the exits, I guess like the clearer they get, and exits that aren't traveled very often eventually become kind of overgrown and eventually vanish. So there's this weird kind of like organic living quality to the road. And then, as you say, yeah, there's people who kind of live permanently on the road, and they've built gas stations and hotels and things. So there's this kind of like separate like society or ecosystem of these kind of like travelers who've stepped out of their own times to just exist on the road. I guess another thing is that you can also see past and present versions of yourself somehow on the road, or like other people will run into, past or future versions of you and tell you what they did. So, and as you said, and as Raj is saying, it's not all it's not laid out very clearly exactly what the rules are here. But so let's get Tom back in here too. Tom, anything else you want to say about the road, or like, did you like that idea, or how did that strike you?
Yeah, I think it's a really cool, exciting idea to have this road that you can travel through time. And I thought it was a very romantic feeling idea that somebody could be from, like you said, it's sort of like Amber in this way, but somebody could be from somewhere, and then they could go to a different time in a different place, and then they could change something. And then eventually, if the thing they change becomes sort of discovered by other people who can travel the road, then it's almost like the way neurons work. Like the more people who travel it, the more built up that road becomes. And then eventually the place that you came from can become less traveled to or less attractive, so people don't go there as much. So it becomes sort of in disuse, disrepair, grown over. And eventually that entire road that leads to the place where you're from can get completely wiped out. so that you have this person who's searching for the place that they're from but can never find it. That was a really cool idea that was sort of developed somewhat in the book. I just thought that really pulled on my heart to think like you could be from somewhere. It feels kind of like aging. You're from somewhere and you're trying to get back to that place, but you can't ever really get back to it. And then I thought it was a couple of parallels. I thought, first of all, the whole idea of the multiverse that gets kicked around way too much now in superhero movies, or at least was for the past few years. I don't know if they're finally giving that a rest now, but that seems to come from this kind of thing. And I realize Zelazny wasn't the one who invented it, but he did. Well, maybe he did invent it. I mean, with Amber. You see that so much in TV.
No, there were other multiverse. I mean, like I think Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion was first, and there was like the Fletcher Pratt, a complete Enchanter series. So, I mean, I think Zelazny took the concept about as far as you can take it, but he definitely didn't invent it.
But now you can see why when George R.R. Martin people were asking him, like, well, producers were asking him, well, you got to do another show for us. And so he said, okay, well, he had several ideas. And one of them was to do a show out of Roadmarks, and whichever studio he was talking to absolutely loved it. And they were like, yeah, let's do this. And so they were moving forward. And I guess he had written a pilot, or he had hired a writer who had written a pilot. But then it seems to have vanished. And maybe that's because that multiverse thing got way too played out. But at that time, 5 years ago, that was really hot and people were really interested in it. So maybe that's why this was going to be a series for a while there. And then the last thing...
Actually, let me just jump in on that. I forgot to mention that. Yeah. So actually, the reason that we're talking about this now, after so many years of me, sort of having this book on my to-be-read pile is, so in 2021, there was this announcement. It was kind of leaked. They didn't mean to announce it, but that George R.R. Martin was developing Roadmarks for HBO. So, I mean, that would be pretty cool if there was a Zelazny TV show, because, Zelazny is nowhere near as well known as he ought to be. And a big movie or TV show has always been the thing that would kind of catapult him into the mainstream, public consciousness. So there was that, but then also this book, maybe as a result of that, got put onto the SF Masterworks list, the Glance list that I've said is my favorite. That's like the I found the most reliable list for finding the best classic science fiction is the SF Masterworks list. So it was kind of the combination of those two things. When I saw there was the HBO deal and then the SF Masterworks list, that was kind of what prodded me to finally give this book a try. And as Tom is saying, like, there's been no new developments on the HBO show recently, so its future is very much up in the air, I think, right now. But that's kind of why we're talking about the book now. But so sorry, Tom. Go ahead, though.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It also, when you see, there was one of the, I can't remember if it was, I think it might have been the Doctor Strange movie, the first one of those, when they finally explained how time travel was going to work. And I remember thinking, well, that's a really cool way to do time travel, that every time you go back in time and do something else, like you can't, you go back in time and kill your own grandfather, you would cease to exist, but only on this branch of the timeline. And the other branch of the timeline that you came for, you still exist. So that was kind of a cool way of handling it. But you see it here written, I assume, back in the 70s, or maybe even the 60s, probably the 70s.
This book is 79. It was published
79. Okay, so you see it here where he lays that out almost exactly the same way. He's like, well, no, you could go back in time and I don't know if he explicitly says kill your grandfather, but you change things, but then they're not changed in another branch of the road. And they show that visually in that Marvel movie, and it's cool to think, they didn't really come up with that. That was already there with Zelazny, and as you pointed out, probably with other people too. But I really enjoyed that kind of thinking, that it's all there, and you just can travel it and you can do whatever you want, because it's going to change things, but not everywhere.
And one detail I really like too was there's this suggestion that one of there's different people they mention who are travelers of the road, and one of them is Ambrose Bierce. And there's this idea that Ambrose Bierce probably like traveled the road and got some of the ideas for his stories from traveling the road. And that also he just ended up permanently on the road because in real life, Ambrose Bierce disappeared. And so Zelazny kind of has fun with the idea, like, oh, he just disappeared onto the road. That's why he dropped out of history. This is Ambrose Bierce. He's a writer. If anyone doesn't know, he wrote a famous short story called "Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge."
A funny story about that. There was a movie that came out called Jacob's Ladder that has the exact same plot as Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, just set in Vietnam instead of in the Civil War. And I had not seen it yet, but I really wanted to see the movie, and I didn't know it was based on that story. And a friend of mine said, "Have you seen that movie yet?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I just saw it. It's amazing." And I said, "Do not spoil it for me." And he said, "Okay, I won't spoil it, but have you ever read the story in Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge?" And I went, "Thank you, Joel. You just completely ruined the movie for me. I know the ending now." But it's a fantastic short story if you haven't read it.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of the road. And then there's a lot of other ideas in this book. But I guess I'll just ask Raj. So you start reading this book and kind of just what were your initial impressions of it?
Well, I mean, the nice thing about it was I picked it up, and it's been a little while since I've read any Zelazny, and it was like, oh, I know exactly who I'm reading. Like there was just his voice is there, the way he tells stories is there, and I would guess that some people might be a little bewildered by just even the chapter. At first, I was like, wait a second, oh, is this out of order? Or how is it working? And then you kind of pick up on it. I found.
Well, why don't you just explain that?
Yeah,
Raj,
so it's the chapters are all labeled either 1 or 2, and I believe that it starts with 2 and then goes 1, and all of the 1 chapters are focused on Red and his sort of and they're linear. I believe that they focus on his storyline, and then all of the 2 chapters are just various times and places and different people and without necessarily any direct connection. And I read, and Dave, maybe this is something you were waiting to pull out, but I read afterwards because I was like, I was just fascinated by how this came together. And he had he wrote them each 2 chapter, like with no order in mind, and just randomly put them together. And then his editor kind of moved a few things around, but there was never meant to be any specific order to those other chapters. They just sort of illuminate parts of the greater story around the Red storyline, I guess.
Yeah, he shuffled them, and it's similar to Hunter S. Thompson, I think, who wrote The Naked Lunch, where that guy was a little different though. He was on some mind-altering substances, but he took the manuscript for The Naked Lunch and like threw it in the air and then put it all back together in a random order, and he hadn't numbered the pages, and then his editor kind of did some help to it, but it made me think of that.
I think it's maybe apocryphal, but Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22, the story is that he just shuffled the chapters randomly. I mean, I don't think that's actually true, but it could be. They're all kind of out of order.
But
let me just say one thing about the 1s and the 2s is that the 1 chapters, in addition to being Red story, all take place on the road.
Right.
And then the 2 chapters take place
all over the place.
I think entirely or mostly in different locations throughout time and space. And so like the Randy chapters, the Sun chapters are that's in the 2. That's among the 2, subplot.
But what I guess just going back to, my impression of it was I enjoyed it. There's a lot of really interesting ideas. There's funny parts. There's so much jammed into what is ultimately a very short novel. And like I said, I think 2 of the things that came across to me were like, Zelazny didn't seem that interested in the plot being a traditional plot by any way, because it's not at all. There's no, there's a lot of, I guess if you're expecting the rise and fall and the conflict and all of that kind of stuff, it doesn't follow that. I enjoyed a lot of the pieces here. What I found interesting was, again, and I'm always, I guess, in the back of my mind comparing this stuff to Amber, because there are some parallels here. There's not a lot about, if Red is the main character, there's not a lot about him to get to know other than what he's done on the road and how other people react to him. But you don't get a lot about, him as a character. And surprisingly, that didn't mean that I couldn't follow him through or attach to him or, get any kind of enjoyment from his storyline. But that was a little bit different. And it seemed like Zelazny was like, this is what you get. Later on, I think you find more about his background.
Right.
But his personality is presented, and that's pretty much it, which I found interesting. And I think I probably would have preferred a little bit more to him. And then the other thing I'll just randomly mention is I don't think there are any... I like this again, and I've never had a problem following it with his stuff specifically, but I don't believe that there are any attribution tags at all to any of the dialogue. There's just people saying things and then action. And I thought that was really interesting. So like a lot, you have to read along and have a sense of, who these people are so you can follow it. But I kind of loved diving back into that way of like, okay, it's going on, it's very immediate, but you have to pay attention. And he's not writing anything more than what he feels you need to get this story, which I like. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's one stylistic thing Zelazny does that I'm not crazy about, which is where he'll have a bit of exposition about the character, like, so-and-so, turned around and stared or something. And then the next line of dialogue is for that character, but he'll put it on the following line, which is a little bit unusual. And so it took me a little while to get back into that, because that's not how most authors would do it. They would attach that dialogue immediately after the bit of exposition. And so, yeah, it was a little confusing to me sometimes who was talking, and I would have to, pay close attention to sort of sort that out. But yeah, once you kind of like get used to the fact that Zelazny does that, it gets easier to follow. What was the first thing that you said there, Raj? I was going to react to something else you just said.
I think it was just about Red, not really having.
Oh yeah. Like I think there's basically no interiority of Red at all. Like you never get inside his head. I don't think at all. Maybe there's a little bit, but that was something I questioned. I wish that we had gotten, because I just felt like one of the things I really like about Zelazny is that he's able to involve you emotionally in a story so powerfully, and make you connect with the main character so much, the way you do with Corwin in the Amber books.
Right.
And I felt like I never really felt that connected to Red. He comes across as sort of even though he has like the exact same personality as Corwin and all the other Zelazny heroes. Since you're not in his mind at all, I just didn't feel that connected to him.
That is, on reading this fully all the way through, that is what I came away with, realizing, this is why I didn't finish reading it the first time, is because I didn't connect to the character, because the character he's so larger than life. He's so like, he's this amazing person who like travels this road and like nobody can beat him. And you can throw like the most highly trained, ninja warrior at this guy, robotic, like assassin who's got nuclear weapons on board and everything. And he'll just win. Like, and you just know he'll win, and he knows he'll win.
And he's not even concerned. Yeah, he's not even concerned.
Yeah, he's not. It's not like Bruce Willis in Die Hard, where he's like freaking out the whole time, really engaging you, thinking like, "Oh, this guy's gonna die." You're just like, no, he's so confident. He's so like 9,000,000% confident which is great. That's like a fun Zelazny thing, just to be relaxed in any situation. But at the same time, with no interiority to him, it was very hard to want to keep reading until, like you pointed out, Raj, you get toward like the second half of the book or somewhere later in the book, and he starts pointing out what this guy's big desires and fears are. You start seeing some of that, and then it starts getting interesting. But you don't get any of that in contrast to in Amber or in Doorways in the Sand, where you've got Fred Cassidy, who's this really interesting character who's got this totally cool alternative lifestyle he's figured out and loves it and doesn't want anyone to mess with it. And then people start messing with it, and you can see it, even though he's very relaxed and that same kind of character, you can see it starting to like raise his hackles in a big way. And that makes it really fun. When you see a character who loves something starting to get that thing taken away, that's very engaging. Whereas Red is just kind of like, yeah, I don't care. I'll just, I'll be fine. Nothing's going to
Yeah,
faze me.
I mean, Tom and I talked about this a little bit in our review of Best of Roger Zelazny, but what makes Zelazny heroes work for me is this sort of juxtaposition of the kind of like, confident, cynical, witty exterior with the, sort of wounded poet interior. And when you don't have that, when it's just the witty, cynical, wry exterior, it sort of deflates the tension because it's like, yeah, doesn't if this person's not concerned about his well-being, why should I be?
Yeah.
It seems like he has it under control.
Yeah.
I guess I should, since we're talking about Red, I should actually say what Red's story is. So Red is this guy. He's been driving the road for as long as he can remember, and doesn't really remember his past that well. And he keeps trying to change the past. In an early scene, we see him trying to bring machine guns back to the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon to help them win the Battle of Marathon, to create a new like exit ramp, because he remembers this place in his past he's trying to get back to. I guess the Greeks won the Battle of Marathon. And it's a little weird because in our timeline, the Greeks did win the Battle of Marathon. So I'm not sure exactly what to make of that. But that's what's going on, with him, is that he's trying to get back to this place that he only has the barest little memory of. And then early on, someone takes an assassin tries to take a shot at him, and he survives, and he figures out that an old business associate of his named Chadwick, who he had a falling out with, has put out a hit on him, and this is pretty badass. It's called The Black Decade, and there are 10 assassins who are going to try to kill him.
Yeah.
And if he survives all of them, then Chadwick will have to back off and let him live. Chadwick is from the future. He's from like the 25th century or something. And in the future, there's this something, it's called, I think, the Games Board, where they do this. This is something they do. They put out hits on people, and it's kind of a game, and people bet on it. And you have assassins from all through time, hunting people up and down the road. Red also has like we mentioned, Leaves, this computer book. Red has another one called Flowers. So it's a copy of the book Flowers of Evil by Charles Baudelaire. But it serves the same function, like, because there are so many possibilities for people who traverse the road, it helps to have like an AI, helping you find your way among all the different like exits and stuff like that. Raj, anything else that we should explain about Red at the beginning here?
Not at the beginning. I mean, I'm sure we'll get to it, but there's a certain like reveal that comes late in the book that changes kind of everything. But I think that's and he people seem to know him, people seem to like him. I think that's the thing. We don't get a lot about Red himself, but everyone who meets him seems to be, friendly with him, except for the people who are sent after him, which again, I also like. There's so many cool ideas in this, and I love the Black Decade. I thought that was a really cool thing. So yeah,
even the people who come after him like him.
True,
mostly.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I love about Zelazny. And I heard this quote. I can't remember who said it, where I read it, but it stuck in my head, that he has this facility for something called easy effrontery, and it's just the idea that it doesn't matter if two people are enemies. They're still friends. They're still friendly. They're still cordial to each other. They still have a kind of rapport with each other, even if they're trying to kill each other, in his stories. Which is true in this. It's true in Amber, and it's true in Doorways in the Sand too. People are just like, I hate you, I'm going to kill you, but hey, let's joke around a little bit. Let's have a good time with it.
So Raj, why don't you tell us about some of these assassins? What did you think of them?
Just in general, with all of the characters that sort of populate this, whether, some of them are historical figures that most people would have heard of, and some of them are literary figures. I found that just my general feeling was that I was definitely missing some of these, and only afterwards did I have a few of them pointed out to me. So, and not all of them are assassins, but for example, one of the assassins is what's his name, John
Sunlight.
Sunlight, who's an enemy of Doc Savage. He's apparently the only villain to have appeared in 2 of the Doc Savage stories, and he wears every time you see him, he's wearing a different rainbow color, essentially all over, like either all purple, all green, whatever. I thought he was fascinating, but I missed that reference completely. And even I should have gotten the Doc Savage one, especially because he shows up, he's called Doc, and then he has bronze skin, and then as he's leaving, his shirt rips. Like it's the clues are all there, but I didn't find that. And so
I've heard of Doc Savage, but I did not know anything.
Yeah.
Like, why don't you tell us, Raj? What did you know about Doc Savage?
Well, I mean, I haven't read a lot of Doc Savage, but he's one of the most famous pulp action heroes, and was ultimately at least one of the inspirations for Superman down the road. He's kind of one of these impossibly like gifted people. He's large and strong, but also is a super genius in his mind, and I think he's he can. Is it Doc Savage? I don't know. Everyone in his group is a specialist in a different way, but I think his thing might be chemistry, or maybe it's biology or whatever. And he's not like super powered, but he's like, in the best shape a human can be. He's one of the smartest humans that ever exists. And, he and his team go around like, stopping bad guys and punching people. And on the covers of all the books, he's always shown sort of with a ripped, like he has like a white button down often, but it's often ripped to show his incredible physique, and he has bronze skin. He's sometimes called, I believe, the Man of Bronze. And eventually some of these ideas filtered down. There's a story called Fortress of Solitude, which again was later used as the name of Superman's hideout. But yeah, so he's possibly the most famous, American, at least pulp hero. But I completely missed that he was in this. But I know that Zelazny, liked pulp action heroes too. So obviously he throws a lot of things in here that I think he loves, especially, I think, Tom, you mentioned the poetry thing. I mean, Leaves of Grass and Flowers of Evil being these AIs, just being these 2, works by famous poets and their reference throughout. But what was your question?
Well, no. Well, let me
the
say,
assassins.
Well, not knowing anything about Doc Savage, other than just having heard the name, this was sort of disorienting for me. Like there's a part where Red says, so Red is confronting John Sunlight. And like I was like really confused. I was like, because you see this guy once and he's wearing all purple or whatever, and you see him again and he's wearing all green, or hear about him and he's wearing all green or yellow or whatever it is. And it's like, are these like, I was imagining they were like clones, and there was like each one wore a different color, and then there's a part where Red is talking to somebody and he says, he's talking to John Sunlight, and he says, oh, I saw this guy in a roadster looking for you. He's going to get you, and it's like, wait, is this an earlier scene from this book that I've just forgot? There's in this book, it's short, like we said, but there's so many characters, there's so many ideas. Each chapter is like 3 pages long, so it's really easy to sort of like feel like you might have missed something, or like you're forgetting a character who you only saw, whose name was mentioned once, or something like that.
I almost think when you're reading a Zelazny book like this, you have to kind of let some of that go. Like when I heard a term put out one time, like you're drinking water from a fountain in the desert, and you're glad that you're getting all this water, but a lot of it's spilling on the ground, but you can't worry about the stuff that's spilling on the ground. You got to just keep drinking the water. And I think that's a good metaphor for what's going on in the Zelazny book. There's a lot of stuff you just got to let go, or you're never going to get through the book. And then you got to go back and read it again and again and start to be like, oh, I can put those, I know what's going on here now. Well,
I heard I was reading reviews of this, and a lot of people were saying that it improves on multiple readings,
right.
That you are able to start making connections.
I mean, you asked me about the villains overall. I would just say that I was a little overwhelmed by, because there's going to be 10 of them, but then there's all these other people like Sundoc and, who are helping to enlist these people, but I didn't really understand how they all fit together. By the end of it, I think I was like, oh, okay, I sort of get what's going on. And so I kind of trusted that I would figure it out or be made clear at some point. And I think it is ultimately, but yeah, I mean, I had to go back and the Doc Savage thing really bugged me because I'm like, oh, I should have at least recognized that. And I went back and I was like, oh, it's like literally like in one paragraph here, and then, you know, pages later another paragraph here, and if you don't catch those, you don't get it, because he doesn't say Doc Savage, and it's not like dwelled upon. It's just Doc, and then you see these few things.
Yeah, he doesn't hit you over the head with anything.
But I think I was a little bit, tiny little bit like frustrated, because I always felt that there was some reference I wasn't getting, and I wanted to get the references. But yeah, that was about it.
My favorite villain turns out to be a friend is Mondame. Is like a robot. I mean, I love Timmy and Tin too, the Chinese assassin, but Mondame is this robot who at first seems to be just a potter, and apparently he's a famous potter. Like, people love his pots. He's just like a beautiful artist, and he's African, but he makes these pots that are so amazing. And then is it Sunlight who shows up and wants to enlist him, but he has to first like take over the robot. So he has to like get him to peel his skin off, and then you can see like the Terminator's exoskeleton underneath, and he reprograms him to want to kill Red. And it turns out that he was left there by an alien civilization as a means of possibly destroying Earth later, should they want to do that. But then he's gone into disrepair. And I just absolutely love that, that concept. And then he ends up, you know, not being able to kill Red because of the disrepair. But then it's really plausible how in the story he then gets his powers back again, and then he's able to help Red, because he's always friends with Red. But then this, you know, Sunlight is gonna turn him into a killing machine, and then can't. And it's cool how plausibly then, once he's Red's friend, he gets his powers back, because he ends up falling in love with Flowers of Evil, the AI book of poetry, and they end up together and spending a lot of time together. And in the course of that, Flowers of Evil rewires him inside or something, or otherwise fixes all his systems. So now he's powerful again. I love that whole arc of that character. Was really cool to me.
Well, just when I read this part about the killer robot who was left on Earth a long time ago by aliens, and then, you know, he can't kill Red because he's broken. Actually, it turns out that's why they left him behind, is because he was broken. And so I was just reading this, and I was like, man, this is something out of like Douglas Adams or Tom Gerencer. I just totally felt like this is something you were gonna connect with.
Well, I totally connected with it. And there's a story I wrote for Mike Resnick a long time ago, called Upright Unlocked, which is about a robot who was left here by this alien race created the world, and left a robot behind. And its job was that once the human race was sufficiently developed, it would dig itself out from underground and present us with a bill for our creation, and which would be like the entire, like 90% of the entire GDP of the planet. And that's how this alien race made their money, is they went around creating planets and then charging people for it. But he became damaged and crazy, and when he came out, he's just struck by the beauty of the world. And I don't remember where it goes from there off the top of my head, but that's what I wasn't going to bring that up. But since you brought it up, I thought, well, yeah. As I was reading that, I was like, holy crap, this is just like that character. I don't think I had read that part of the story in the past, but
no, I think you guys are just on the same wavelength, you and Zelazny.
Oh, that's an honor.
I do think that character was one of my favorites. That, and especially when, you know, he and the AI sort of start developing a romance. Like, I think that was one of the most compelling things, especially given their backgrounds, you know, and the idea that this was once a, like, you know, destructive robot, essentially, who now just derives joy from making pots. Like, I love it. I thought that was really, really
that was cool. So cool. You know what it also reminded me of, Dave, is that story from, was it Sex, Death and Robots or Love, Death and Robots? I forget the name of the show.
Love, Death and Robots.
Love, Death and Robots, the one with the pool cleaning robot that turns into an artist. Reminded me of that.
Zima Blue. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's based on the Alistair Reynolds story.
Okay.
Well, let me just mention some of the other assassins. So I think the first one we're introduced to is Strangulina, who like lives in some post-apocalyptic future and is obsessed with ruins, and she takes lovers and strangles them once they fall asleep afterwards, and has done this like 100 times. So there's her. There's like this like super soldier named Archie who like has all of his limbs replaced with cybernetic limbs. There's one called Max who's like some sort of, similarly sort of a big tank kind of like robot tank thing. Uh, and
Timian
then
Tin.
yeah, Timian Tin is the big one who gets a really big backstory. Well, Tom, why don't you tell us about Timian Tin?
I don't know if I'm going to remember all the details of his backstory, but he is he's like a Chinese grandmaster martial arts guy who, and you guys are going to have to correct me because like the analogy I gave you earlier of the drinking from a fountain and letting a lot of it spill on the ground, I very much did with this book. But so what I remember, and go ahead and correct me after I'm done, he was a Chinese like grandmaster martial arts aficionado.
Well, let me just say, at the beginning, he's a Buddhist monk living in a monastery in like 14th century China.
Oh, right. And then they Sunlight John, is it John Sunlight is his name? Or is this?
It's not him. No, it's like Sundok and Toba.
Oh, okay. So Sundok and Toba, they approach him and they say, "Hey, look, has it ever bothered you?" And I'm going to paraphrase like crazy. Has it ever bothered you that you have parts of your past that you don't remember? And we would like to give you, and he says, yes. And they say, well, we would like to cure that in you. And he says, well, how do you do that? And they say, well, we're going to give you these injections and you're going to start to remember who you were. And he says, the part that bothered me about that is he just kind of takes it for granted that they're telling the truth. So he's like, okay, well, but the only reason I wouldn't do it is not because I'm afraid you're actually going to poison me, but because I'm not sure if I want to be the person I was, or if I remember, what if I remember that person and that person's stronger than me? And then the me that I am now no longer exists. I mean, I'm happy, largely, and I like who I am. And they're like, well, that's the risk, right? That's the risk you take. And he ends up saying, well, okay, let's do it. And so they do it. And he remembers that he was this assassin, but at the same time, he still gets to retain the Timian Tin person. So he becomes this really complicated mix of this past assassin who could kill anyone and this Buddhist monk who is really in tune with everything. And I go ahead now from there because that's what I remember. But I loved that character.
Yeah, no, that's right. And he says, something like, I find I may have a conscience now or something as a result of this, this synergy between the two personalities. Yeah, I think that's basically who he is. I mean, Raj, is there anything else to add about Timian Tin or?
No. I mean, I guess I just thought it was interesting. I actually, he's probably my favorite just because that one encounter where it's sort of like, oh, he was, violent, definitely violent, possibly evil-ish guy in the past and had sort of been I don't know, like brainwashed or whatever, altered to believe he was just this Buddhist monk. And yet, the synthesis isn't just him reverting back to who he used to be. It's sort of like this new hybrid of the two.
That was what a cool character, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Raj just said it, but yeah, he another thing to explain is that he had his memory, because he was so dangerous, he was like captured and had his memory erased and made and rendered harmless essentially by some unspecified future. And he's from the future. I don't know if we said that, but in the future they erased his memory and rendered him harmless, but didn't want to kill him, so they sort of just stuck him in this monastery in the distant past to let him live out his life peacefully.
So one of the coolest scenes in the book is with him and Archie when they meet and they're going to fight. And Archie is this, you've already explained, he's this like amazing assassin, and so is Timian Tin. And so what kind of a fight do you have between the two most amazing assassins fighters in the world? Well, it's like a chess match between two grandmaster chess players who both know that if one move is made, they can see the entire game ahead of them. So instead of actually landing punches, they're like one of them will like raise his palm a half an inch, and the other one will like turn his neck sideways 3/4 of an inch. And they're going on like that, having this like barely moving or just doing these bizarre, like small movements. And Zelazny doesn't come out and explain like this is a fight, but you just get it. I don't know how. I don't know. Did you have the same experience I did?
They're also quoting Zen koans at each other like throughout this like fight.
Correct. Right. So, but this fight is like one of them will move, like barely move, and the other one will barely move. And I think Tarantino did something like this too in one of the fight scenes in Kill Bill, where these two fighters are like almost not moving because they know like if I move here and you move there, like they can see the possible moves ahead, so they know like basically who's going to win if they make a mistake and throw an entire punch or something. And they end up they start out fighting physically, and then they switch to this sort of dance, and then by the end they say one of them Archie just admits like, okay, well, that was a great fight. Thank you. That was one of the best fight I've ever had. And then he jumps over the railing. Like that was to me one of the coolest scenes in the book.
Is that what I thought I thought Timmy and Tin kind of like nudged him off, nudged him in such a way that he went flying off the thing or something.
You may be right.
Yeah, I think that was my understanding as well. But yeah, I mean, the nature of the fight was interesting like that. And again, Zelazny does one of those weird things that sometimes misses me. Like Amber is full of this, where he tells you every single move of the sword fight, and like, where they're putting their legs and what position they're in. But in this one, it's interesting because, like you said, they're moving their bodies, but they're not striking one another necessarily. They're just sort of orienting themselves. And I thought that was cool too.
Yeah, well, Dave, didn't you tell me in the last panel about Zelazny that he was actually an accomplished martial artist and fencer? So That's why he's able to describe these fight scenes so well?
No, for sure. Yeah, no, he was a black belt in Aikido and actually taught Aikido. And so, yeah, that obviously informs his martial arts stuff that he writes about. I thought that they were throwing like punches and kicks and stuff, but like nothing was, it was all just part of this like dance, that it was like, nothing was landing because they are so like both such expert martial artists that they can anticipate everything.
Okay.
But that scene was cool. And so the overall plot of this book is extremely strange.
Yeah.
And feels extremely made up. I actually there's a quote I found. Wait, where was it? Okay, so Zelazny said that how this book came about is that he was just like driving along the highway and just on a whim decided to take some exit he'd never taken before just to see what was there. And this led him to take different turns, and each turn got more kind of a smaller road and more overgrown and, less developed and everything, until finally he came to this like this place where there were log cabins and horses pulling carts, and it looked like he had driven back to the 19th century. And he's like, oh, that's a cool idea, that you just take exits and you just end up in different times and stuff like that. And so he says, quote, I went back and started writing Roadmarks that same afternoon. So that gives you an idea of how much planning he had done before starting to draft this novel. But yeah, it feels, and I think Zelazny was a very improvisational sort of writer just in general, but this book seems really like, it seems like, like he's making it up as he goes along, even more so than usual. I don't know, did that jump out at other people?
Oh yeah,
as well.
Definitely. He this book very much seems like he had the cool concept, and you can tell the concept is there from the start of the road and how that operates. And then as he starts going forward, you can almost tell when he's like, okay, well, now I've got this road and I've got this main character who's larger than life, who's got some kind of job and he's trying to find this place. And now it's going to get boring if I don't do something. So it feels like then he went away for a while and thought about it and thought, I know. And he came back with the Black Decade. And then that was going along for a while. And then I feel like he reached a point where he thought, the Black Decade is starting to get tedious. It needs to go somewhere else. And so he ended the Black Decade prematurely before all 10 came through. And then he was like, I need somewhere else to go. And eventually this needs to end. And then I feel like he came through with another idea then, which was the one that you referred to, Raj, and you're referring to, Dave, that makes it seem like this is really bizarre. And he came back in with that one and injected that new idea in. And that's the structure of the book. You've got the road, that's cool, but you can't live with that forever. So you got to have the Black Decade, and you can't live with that forever. You got to have some kind of ending. So here comes idea number 3, and they're all kind of pasted together.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just say, so yeah, about halfway through the book, it turns out that Red has these episodes.
Well, it happens after. So if I may just interject for a second, It's just like, the time travel thing is set up. You have people from the future with this amazing technology. And then all of a sudden, like, weirdly, like, magic shit starts showing up. And you're like, wait a second. And I guess you can roll with that because it's sort of all through history. They haven't said it doesn't exist. But then you have a scene between 2 dragons out of nowhere. And it's like, oh. And
well, actually before that, so at one point, Red picks up a hitchhiker named Fraser,
right,
who then like starts like talking about demons and doing some sort
spells.
Of like fiery pentagram kind of thing or something like that. And then another character, Dodd, shows up a couple chapters later, and he also like vanishes, leaving a flaming hole in the ceiling, and his clothes disintegrate into ashes or like something like that. And so, yeah, so we are getting this sort of like more like weird magic kind of stuff that we don't know what's going on. And then it turns out that Red has these episodes, and Tom and I talked about this in the other panel we did where Zelazny actually had epilepsy. And so he would have these like epileptic seizures and have like visions and stuff like that. And he was always really kind of private about it. And so Red, so I can't help think that this part was influenced by that. But so Red goes all, he's like, I can feel one of my episodes coming on. I want to be alone. And so he like goes to his, he kicks everyone out of his hotel room, and then undergoes this episode where we're told, well, I'll just say where he turns into a dragon, basically. I think he's maybe not 100% aware of exactly what's happening, but he knows that he has these episodes, and each time he has one of these episodes, he gets a little bit younger and remembers more about his past, like a tiny bit more about his past. And that idea definitely seemed like it came to Zelazny on the spur of the moment to me, because there's really nothing about that earlier in the book.
I would guess that one of the editor changes to the 2 chapters was putting that, because I believe the dragon chapter comes right before we start learning about his dreams to prime us that this is something that is going to become a thing. But I was just like, it's like comes up so late that you don't even know dragons exist. And then you're like, oh, this is what's going on. And I think, if somebody had come into the writing group that I was a part of and showed this, people would be like, well, you got to establish dragons exist way earlier and like thread that through. And again, he's not that concerned. He's just, and neither, this got published that way. So nobody was like, you can't do that. But it does seem to come out of nowhere. I was sort of like, oh, like this changes sort of everything. But then somehow, and I think, Tom, you were possibly referring to this, by the end, it kind of all comes together again. And I was like, oh, okay, I get sort of now where this, like it helped make some of the sharp edges for me a little less sharp by the end, weirdly. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I guess I'd be curious how you guys react to it, because I mean, like I felt like this book to me felt like Zelazny. It felt to me like watching an improv show.
Yeah,
and like people, he's like, okay, so I've got I need 2 historical figures, and people are like Hitler, and he's like, okay, I need another one, like the Marquis de Sade, and he's like, okay. And now my main character, there's two special things about him. Like, what are they? And someone's like, he ages backwards. And he's like, okay, he ages backwards. Good. And I need one more. And like, okay, he's a dragon. It's like, okay, he's a dragon. It just feels like totally random suggestions from the audience. And he's just like, okay, I can work with this, and is like putting on this virtuoso performance to like try to weave all of these like crazy unrelated elements into a coherent story, and like sort of succeeding but not really succeeding in making it all like cohere in the end. That's kind of how the book felt to me.
Yeah, it reminds me of I'm blanking on the name of the author, but it reminds me of that story, Everything That Rises Must Converge, where you start with the family and then you also have the other element that there's a serial killer or there's a band of murderous robbers in the area, and you follow the family, and eventually by the end you have the family. Do you know the story I'm talking about?
Yeah, you're talking about it's the other wrong title. It's A Good Man Is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor.
I thought it was called Everything That Rises Must Converge.
The one about the family who like takes the shortcut and they get captured by the
misfit
bandits who execute them one by one.
Yeah.
No, that's A Good Man Is Hard to Find.
Oh, pardon me. All right. Well, anyway, probably not the best analogy then, but it just that kind of thing where you've got a couple of different elements and then you put them together in the story and they work together. And maybe they do, but maybe like Raj was pointing out, you have to kind of start things a little bit earlier. You have to blend them more seamlessly. And I feel like they didn't necessarily, just because he didn't plot it out in advance. He didn't think it through in advance. He just started writing, like you said, and then started adding things as he felt like he needed something new.
Yeah, and I think another difficulty is that then like Red just has to like realize all this stuff, kind of like, or like intuit all this stuff that you're like, how could he ever intuit? I mean, I guess it's all magic and memories coming back and stuff like that. But he's like, okay, maybe like I'm a dragon. And okay, so how it develops is that like, so it turns out that the dragons like dreamed the road into existence, and it's part of their like reproductive cycle where dragons are born as old humans and then age backwards, or like are set loose upon the road to age backwards, and then once at a certain point they die and are reborn as dragons, and that's like how dragons reproduce, I guess. I mean, but Red kind of has to. This all just kind of comes to him,
But I think the thing that I enjoyed is that and again, everything you guys are saying like is similar to what I was thinking, that in the sense that, the black, Tom, I think your take is amazing, because I think, we get this Black Decade thing, and then I'm like, but none of them are actually going after him, or they're being dealt with in different ways, or it's not a conflict at all. And I think my guess is that Zelazny was like, I don't feel like making that kind of scene. I just want to do something different with these characters. Or maybe he was just like, I'm going to put them in a room, see what happens. And it didn't lead to, endless attempts on Red's life. But what I like is that he's like, I'm a dragon. What doesn't he guess that like Chadwick is setting all of this up just so that he can become his true self.
Right.
But then what I think the part that I really like is that Zelazny then is like, nope, sorry, that's actually not true. This is for somebody else. And so it kind of confounds that expectation.
It's for Chadwick, right? The whole thing is like set Red up to try to strike back at Chadwick. And then he doesn't really end up striking back, because they have this easy effrontery scene where they're riding in the car. And then I was muddy on what actually happened there, but Red ends up sort of passing out and getting ejected from the car, and Flowers is thrown from the car as well. And then the car crashes and burns, and that's when Chadwick is born into a dragon. And that's when Red realizes that what's been happening all along, which that whole part is really kind of cool. It's like, oh, it's actually been, the whole thing has been trying to sort of hatch out this dragon out of Chadwick, which that was kind of, I found that kind of nifty. I just thought
it seems like kind of convoluted.
Sure.
Like a convoluted way for dragons to reproduce is that, okay, so one of them is going to hire 10 assassins, but that's just to get the get the target to strike back to like.
I don't think
know.
that they all have to have 10 assassins. I just think it was that that maybe Chadwick was hanging on too long because he was so rich and he could live forever if he wanted to. So there had to be a way for him to hatch, and that if the dragon egg is not hatching, there has to be another way for it to hatch. You have to, come in with the Pitocin or something and get it hatched out.
I feel
that was
like
for you, Dave, because I know you had a baby in the past year or so.
If Fred had like turned into a dragon and then went off to a different life, it wouldn't have felt as satisfying to me as him having to return to the road and eventually like figure out his own path again in the future. Because something about the road makes it seem like that, if you're a guy who drives the road, you got to keep driving it, or at least obviously at some point he should turn into a dragon, but like him going back to it at the end seemed to make sense. I mean, I don't understand what Randy's purpose is in the story either, except that he like shows up and he meets his dad and like, cool. But like Randy, I was then wondering, like, is Randy going to turn into a dragon too? I don't really know. I think they mentioned that they have actually didn't. Oh, it does actually say that. I think Red theorizes that all the people who can access the road are their children, the dragon's children. So like, I guess that means that that's how all of these people come in. So they're not dragons themselves, but like it is. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any, like you said, real cohesion to it. I think there's arcs that I was able to be like, oh, okay, I enjoyed that. And I really like this and the other thing, but it does feel like stream of consciousness. And I'm amazed that the editor was just like, okay, yeah, I'll move some things around and then we're good. And maybe Zelazny was like, I'm not changing it. This is what I want to write. And that's fine. But it does seem kind of fever dreamish in many ways, or improv, as you mentioned.
Yeah, well, I think like by this point, Zelazny was such a bankable commodity that, they would publish his first drafts, essentially, which I think is what this is. I mean, the thing is, like, I think everything was sort of his first draft. And because I mean, like, Nine Princes in Amber, I think he wrote in like a month with no plan for where it was going. And that's one of my favorite books of all time. So, I can't fault him too much for kind of making it up as he goes along.
It's funny, we were talking about this and I was thinking like, oh right, like, so as we were trying to figure out how he wrote this, I mean, Nine Princes in Amber, like, of course the main character starts with amnesia and then slowly things start to come back as he's writing it, like, oh yeah, and then this part I remember this part. And that's sort of what he does here too. It's sort of like as he's figuring it out, the main character starts to remember stuff. And I imagine like he hit upon the dragon thing, was like, that's the thing that's gonna like make this work. But yeah, I mean, this seemed like the kind of thing that if he had sat on it, I mean, I think I read that he started it in 1970, but it wasn't published to 79. But you'd think then that he would have like messed around with it a bit more structure wise. However, clearly the chapter 2 parts were meant to be an experimental thing. Like he was trying something and maybe he just didn't want to mess with it too much because of that. I don't know.
I think he's from the same school of writing as Harlan Ellison, where Ellison was an absolute genius at sitting down and knocking something out. But when it came to going back and saying, now I need to rework this or fix it, he just wasn't interested. And I think that was more on vogue back in the 70s, certainly, than it is now. Now everything is extreme craftsmanship. I don't think you have a lot of that wild experimentation going on. But I think also that people like Ellison and Zelazny were able to do what they were able to do because they were able to fail and not care. And I think, it's like the Coen brothers. I mean, 25% of their movies are absolute genius, and 75, maybe I got the ratio wrong, but 75% of them are really hard to watch because they're just like, we just belted this one out, because they can try anything. They can do anything. They're not afraid of failing. And that's where the genius comes from for them. Same with Zelazny is, I wonder if he would have been more sort of circumspect and really analyzing what he was doing and really working on it, if he would have turned out the moments of genius that he did.
No, I think there's a couple of things going on. I mean, I think one thing is that, he was a professional working writer with 3 kids, and a family to support and everything. And he's like, as a professional working writer, I have to turn out X number of words per day of publishable material. And my process is this very, improvisation based approach. And sometimes it really works and sometimes it like doesn't work as well. But, either way, I got to keep the books coming out, keep the checks coming in. I mean, I think there was definitely some aspect of that. I think it's also like, it's really hard to know how good something is that you've written because you're so close to it. And I mean, he wrote Nine Princes in Amber and just put it in a drawer because he wasn't sure if it was that good. Same thing with A Rose for Ecclesiastes. Same thing with Creatures of Light and Darkness, So his attitude may have just been, I just write them. It's up to everyone else to decide how good they are. I just do the best I can. And that's that. I mean, I think also at this stage in his, in this career, he was having to turn out material more quickly, I mean, and couldn't do as much research. I mean, I read that when he wrote Lord of Light, he read 25 books about Buddhism and Hinduism as research for that.
Wow.
And by this point, he just like didn't have time anymore with the family and everything to put that kind of research into a book. So they were more kind of like, just whatever kind of bits of research he had already done. He was just kind of pulling them together.
Yeah, I do love how sparse it is. There's, like that's a very rare thing for people to be that bold and gutsy, to be like, I'm not putting anything in here extra. Like you can figure out everything. I mean, whether you appreciate it or not, I guess it's different. But like, again, the dialogue takes a little bit of work. Sometimes you have to read again and be like, oh, is this guy or this other guy? And there's not a lot of interiority because I think he's giving you, action and whatever. Obviously, I think we said that there's not enough to give Reds more substance, but I think it's like the minimum you need to tell the story he uses. But I appreciate that kind of approach. Like Gene Wolfe is an entirely different kind of writer, but I also appreciate in a lot of his works that you have to read what he says. And if you skip over paragraphs or lines or you're not taking them in, you will completely miss whole chunks of like background information or character information because it might just be contained in a sentence. And I kind of like that approach of like, again, it's part of its confidence, but part of it is like, I'm not going to talk down to you. I'm not going to like emphasize things just so you get it. Like I'm going to just tell the story as it should be told. And you might have to do a little bit of work, and that's okay. This again is not Gene Wolfe, and it's a lot lighter. And obviously you guys mentioned the humor. I mean, it is a little bit wacky at times. I mean, the Adolf Hitler scene is, just like a almost like just a throwaway joke that he throws in there. Yeah. And I think that not to reference other works, but you just mentioned Lord of Light. Wasn't it George R. R. Martin who was talking about how he spends a whole chapter of that book just setting up a pun based on, what was it? That's when the fit hit the shan. Yeah, like that whole thing. And it's like, when you get there, there's a part of me that every time I read it, there's a part of me that I'm like, oh, I appreciate that he went to all this trouble to do this for himself, because he's doing it for himself, really. But on the other hand, there's a part of me that feels annoyed that I'm like, oh God, this is all in service of this one thing. Sometimes
it's a giant shaggy dog story.
Yeah, but yeah.
Well, I do think, I mean, I do think another thing is that Zelazny probably had a lot of fun writing this book, it's like, so it's like a combination of things. It's like, the requirements of being a professional writer, the improvisational approach that he took anyway.
But
this one, he was kind of just riffing, I feel like. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just, I mean, I love your improv analogy, but the thing is, like, the Marquis de Sade is in here because Zelazny wanted him in here. Not, like maybe he chose him at random, but I feel like a lot of this stuff seemed to be things that he's, the poetry is there. There's ideas, metaphysical concepts that, we've seen him explore in many other ways. So there's a lot of stuff in here that obviously he gets excited about and wants to explore. It's just assembled in a very different way than some of that other stuff is. But I think most of the stuff that's in there, like we didn't even mention, like, the T-Rex that has like a little slave circuit in its brain, so that, the Marquis de Sade ends up like basically controlling him, the T-Rex, through that. And then the T-Rex at the end ends up sort of being the dumb mate of one of the dragons, which is like bonkers. Like, that's insane. But, am I going to be annoyed that there's a like T-Rex in the story? No, I thought that was kind of cool,
Well, there's talk about puns or bad jokes toward the end there. The dragon says, Not much of a brain, but man, what a body.
Yeah. That disturbed me a little bit because I'm like,
Well,
they
yeah.
set up these dragons as these, immensely celestial, powerful, like, deep creatures, and then, she's keeping a T-Rex as, her sex
her
toy.
her pool boy.
Well, but going back to what Tom was saying about, the experimental nature of this book and a lot of 70s science fiction, I do definitely miss the era where, authors like Zelazny or Philip K. Dick, they could just write the weirdest shit they could think of and get it published. And if it didn't work, it's like, oh, well, whatever.
Right.
I feel like now there's so much more pressure. Like if your book doesn't sell, you're done.
Publishing is too conservative to do anything like that these days, I feel like.
Yeah, and if it does sell, they just want you to basically write the same book over and over and over again. And I mean, Zelazny definitely was pressured to just write more Amber, But this is all after Amber. I mean, this is Roadmarks was written between the first Amber sequence and the second one. So he's like resisting the directive to just churn out more Amber. And it's just like, no, I'm going to write about my Tyrannosaurus Rex, Marquis de Sade, Doc Savage, time travel book.
You do see some of this stuff. Like, I mean, I feel like it's been a while since I've read like the short stories he wrote, after the second Amber series. So like he was apparently gearing up to kind of maybe congeal those together into another Amber thing. But and they're kind of like these short little snippets of things. But I think there's one where he goes to a graveyard and, there are graves of people, and one of them I think is like maybe Remo Williams or something, who's another pulp action hero and stuff. So like these are things that he's always been interested in or like enjoyed and sprinkles into his stories and in places. I know one of my favorite comics ever was a comic called Grimjack, which came out from First Comics, and not many people know it because it was an independent comics company and it ran for something like, I don't know, only like 80 something issues. But he did wrote a foreword for the one graphic novel that they put out, like a single, like large scale painted story that they put out. And I was like, of course he's a fan of this because there's pulp influences, there's sort of historical influences. It's multiversal in some ways. And but it's hard boiled at the same time. And, like, I feel like those are the threads that I see come out in things like this,
Well, and the Grimjack character makes a cameo appearance in one of the Amber books.
Yes, yeah.
I think it's Blood of Amber. It's one of those.
Yeah. So yeah, he loves throwing these things in, and I mean, I don't, I think that's cool. I think if you're a writer, throw in all the toys you want to play with. Again, I don't think this is his most successful novel, but I was thrilled just to see the pieces that he was playing with. You know what I mean? I think there's the other part of the writer in me that looks and says, oh, there is a better novel that would suit me better, let's say, to be found in all these pieces if they were assembled in a slightly different way and maybe certain things were fleshed out more and maybe edited. But I can't say I didn't enjoy the hell out of reading this. And again, Dave, I'll say thank you for, giving me reason to do so, because it's, like I said, I probably will go on and read some more or reread some more Zelazny, but it's been a while, and it sort of hit me in the right place just from like I said, a tone and a content standpoint. Again, even if the plot was sort of not to my liking first.
Yeah. I mean, for me, this is definitely like second tier or possibly third tier Zelazny. This is not Amber. This is not Doorways in the Sand or Night in the Lonesome October or Lord of Light. This is sort of, like I said, it's sort of like him riffing. I don't know. Although, Tom, how do you feel about this compared to like Doorways in the Sand, say, which is sort of a similarly sort of comic treatment?
Yeah, no, what you just said, the sentence you just said, just absolutely nailed it for me. It's not Doorways in the Sand. It's not Night in the Lonesome October or Lord of Light. It's a second tier, maybe third tier. Doorways in the Sand, the whole thing just hangs together so well, and the comedy is always so tied into the characters that everything just feels right. You read it, and I just love the experience of it. This I love the experience of because I love his voice. There's something about art where it's all about like putting an emotion down into like some kind of storage media, whether that storage media is the printed word or it's a painting or a sculpture or a piece of music. You're taking an emotion, you're putting it into some storage device that can then be unpacked by another human brain that can then experience that emotion. And Zelazny just makes you feel that so well, which is why I would recommend not listening to the audiobook version, which I made the mistake of doing that for this panel. And because you don't get the same experience at all, you get somebody else's interpretation of it. Whereas if you read this, it goes into your brain. I've got the regular book and read most of it that way after I listened to the audiobook, because I was like, I'm missing something here. And I was absolutely right. When you read it, something happens in your brain where he triggers all these emotions in you. And I love that. I love the way Zelazny does that. He does that well in this book, but he doesn't do it as well as he does in like A Night in the Lonesome October you mentioned, where that story has a lot of similar elements. It's got, it's told from the point of view of Jack the Ripper's dog. It's got the werewolf in it. It's got Count Dracula in it. It's got all kinds of different characters in it, but they all fit together in a really fun way that really engages your emotions. And this one does by turns, but not as a whole symphony.
This also has
together
Jack the Ripper as well in it for a second, right?
Yeah. I actually thought that was funny because, so one of the assassins just vanishes. And you have to read a little bit closely, but it turns out that she just like went off with Jack the Ripper, and that's why she's never seen again.
Well, she calls him Jack, right? And I did notice that one, yeah.
But I do think that like some of Zelazny's other things, Amber, Night in the Lonesome October, Doorways in the Sand, the aesthetic is just a little bit more unified.
Yeah.
Like this feels like more like a superhero comic in terms of just like so many disparate things that don't really fit together, all jammed into one story. And there's a sort of, there is definitely sort of a gonzo appeal to that, but at the same time, it makes it feel just like sort of goofier and more kind of random and than some of his works that I like more,
So you mentioned the TV show early on, and obviously there's been no like it's probably dead in the water, but I can, given that there's not a strong narrative here, I can see that it would be a nice backdrop for a TV show, because you could kind of develop any of these things in certain ways. But do you think that they would have gone with dragons? Because like that is the point where I feel like it would be a little bit too far. I think they would use other entities of some sort, right? Probably.
Well, so Tom and I reviewed the Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency TV show, which I don't know, Raj, if you ever saw that. It's actually really good, but it like basically takes like the idea and like the characters sort of from the book and then creates an entirely different story out of it. And I have to assume that's what they would have done with this.
It would just be the road and the time travel and then a completely different story set up. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. It's actually funny. So I went back because I have this book of Zelazny's letters and it has an index. So I went through every time he mentions Roadmarks to see what he would say. And it was all just basically about an earlier attempt to get a movie made out of this. And it's this pretty crazy story. So there was this guy, Casey St. Charnes, who just like wrote to Zelazny or something and said, "Hey, I'm a screenwriter. What do you say if I just adapt Roadmarks into a screenplay on spec and see if I can sell it?" And Zelazny's like, "Yeah, normally I wouldn't do it, but for whatever reason, I was like, sure, go for it." And so for like a decade or so, like they tried to get this screenplay produced, and it actually was looking really promising for a while. And like at one point, James Coburn was interested in playing Red Dorikin. He had played like he was in a lot of Western movies. He was in like The Magnificent Seven. And then Francis Ford Coppola at one point seemed interested in directing it.
Wow.
But then it kind of like stalled for a while. And then this guy, Casey St. Charnes, went in for knee surgery and they put him under general anesthesia. And when he woke up, they like messed up the dose or something. And when he woke up, he didn't remember anything that had happened to him since he was 12 years old.
Oh my God.
And so in this letter, Zelazny's like, "Oh, it's been 3 months since this happened, and the doctors say if his memories haven't come back within 3 months, they're probably never going to come back." Uh, so and then so for like 3 months, his wife and mom had been just like filling him in on everything that had happened to him since he was 12 years old, and so obviously, you know, I think that threw a monkey wrench into the screenplay. I couldn't find whatever happened if he ever got his memories back or what, but then Zelazny, was diagnosed with cancer and died within like 2 years of that. So then I think the whole thing just kind of,
Wow.
fell by the wayside at that point.
That seems the whole story seems like it came right out of the book.
I know. I was going to say another amnesia thing going on there. So. Wow.
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, like there's like so many like Zelazny should really be a household name when you just look at his talent and how many people loved him and everything. And there's just like so many things that went wrong. Like it's almost like a curse or something. Like, the fact that there hasn't been a movie or a TV show or something. It's like, yeah, go ahead.
No, I needed to correct something because it just occurred to me. The first time I actually read Zelazny, if anyone really cares, it was actually as part of the Wild Card book, which I read when I was a teenager. So that was before I was in college. So he wrote a bunch of stories about, God, I'm going to forget his name right now, but one of the characters who kind of would...
Yeah, Croy Crenson.
Right. So he would hibernate and then wake up with different powers and different looks every time. And those Wild Cards books are, mosaics, right? So there's lots of different stories jammed together from lots of writers, including George R. R. Martin. And some of them are okay, and some of them are great, and some of them, I didn't connect with. But like Zelazny's stuff always stood out because it was sort of like something beyond what the other stories were telling, and sort of in his own little, like he was clearly doing his own thing, and I really enjoy that. So anyway, that's my first Zelazny experience for sure.
Well, I could be making this up, but I seem to remember that, they invited him to be part of Wild Cards, and he's like, I don't want to do it. I would just get bored writing about the same superhero over and over again. And then they're like, well, you could write about a superhero who just changes into a completely different superhero every story. And he's like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. I'll do that. I could be making that up, but I seem to remember reading that somewhere. I guess I'll also just mention that so there's this guy Christopher Kovacs, and he edited the collected stories of Roger Zelazny, and he like annotated all the short stories, which is really an amazing resource. But so I had reached out to him because I had heard that he was doing an annotated edition of Roadmarks, and he said, yeah, so there's actually annotated editions of Roadmarks, Lord of Light, and Creatures of Light and Darkness.
Oh wow!
that are going to be coming out in the next year or so from Centipede Press in limited editions. And they're all going to have 20 or 30 pages or so of annotations. Like, so all the, Zelazny's work is just full of just throwaway references to things from history and literature and art and philosophy and so on. And so, so Christopher Kovacs has gone through and just, explained what all those are.
Yeah. And I think when I was Googling about this novel, and I think some stuff from Kovacs came up as I was looking at it, but somewhere online, if you Google, you can find somebody, maybe it was him, put together translations of all of the French passages of the poetry that was in here, which I believe was from Flowers of Evil. Because there's sections that are just in French, and I didn't bother to go translate them with Google Translate. But I think these are official translations of the poetry. So if anyone reads this and cares about that,
yeah, there was a blog post where there had been darkness.blogspot.com, and it's in the comments thread. There's a lot of good info in there. So just as a sample, Christopher Kovacs, he sent me this thing. One of the entries is Zelazny refers to a Arabor room. Chadwick, I guess, the character Chadwick, the villain, he lives in this room, this like crazy with all these like crazy decorations, and this the description of Chadwick's like apartment is lifted basically, entirely from a novel it's called Arabor is the name of the novel. It's a French novel from 1884 The author is Zoris Karl Huysmans. It's spelled, it looks like Huysmans, Huysmans. It's pronounced Huysman, I think. But it's about a character named Jean Desezant, who's a wealthy aristocrat. And this fictional character was the inspiration for Dorian Gray in Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. So that's where Zelazny got this. There's like a tortoise with jewels on its shell and all sorts of stuff like that. But it's taken from this 1884 novel. So not the kind of reference that the average reader is going to pick up, on a casual reading. So that's why it's good to have an annotated edition for any sort of Zelazny, because he just draws on such a massive, body of knowledge about things. All right. I think that's pretty much. Did we give a reasonably coherent picture of the plot of this book? I don't know if there's any like huge things we left out or anything.
I think so. I mean, you start out with the concept of the road, and then you get into the Black Decade, and then you get into the dragons thing. I think we did explain that.
All right, cool. So maybe we should start wrapping this up. Yeah, I don't know. Raj, anything else you wanted to say about Roadmarks? I guess sorry. One other thing I'll mention is that Zelazny's title was Last Exit to Babylon, and for whatever reason, the publisher changed it to Roadmarks.
I like that so much better.
Yeah.
Last Exit to Babylon is so much better. It's like a good title, but it also conveys what the book is about.
Yeah, it gives you a summary that's really engaging, that you think, oh, that's kind of cool that there could be a road to Babylon.
So I'm not sure what the rationale is there, but there's this really great on the first edition, I guess. I think it is. There's this really great illustration by Daryl Sweet where there's like a blue pickup truck driving down the highway with a dragon flying overhead.
Yeah.
And Zelazny asked, like the compromise was, he asked if they could have a sign on the cover that says Last Exit to Babylon. So yeah. So that's where that detail in the cover came from. But yeah, I don't know why they changed it. Roadmarks is such a bland title and doesn't tell you. It could be it could be about anything,
Yeah.
Okay, but so Raj, anything else you wanted to talk about with Roadmarks?
No, not really. But like I said, I wouldn't I agree with you that it's not one of his best books, but I did enjoy it. And I mean, maybe it's because I'm a Zelazny fan, but I had joy reading this. So thanks again.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not a Zelazny fan, I would not give this a very strong recommendation. I think this is really, I mean, I found it fascinating because I like Zelazny so much, and because just the ways it connects with him and with his other stories. But if you're not a Zelazny fan, this is not the one that I would start with for sure. But it just made me desperate to read more Zelazny. Even second tier, or possibly third tier Zelazny, it just makes me desperate to read more Zelazny. So yeah, there was just something about the way that he tells stories and just the way that he thinks and his personality and stuff that is just so appealing. So this book does have that, even if it is sort of a little bit slapdash in the execution. But Tom, anything else you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, we didn't mention there's a part with a crusader who finds out that he both won and lost the crusade in different realities, and now he just sleeps around the back of a gas station on the road and drinks a lot. And he's waiting for a bishop to come release him from his vow. I just think moments like that, characters like that, are the reason to read this if you are a Zelazny fan. If you're not a Zelazny fan, Dave's right. Start with Night in the Lonesome October, or Lord of Light, or Doorways in the Sand. But if you are a Zelazny fan, you're going to get almost endless little fun characters and moments like that out of this book. So it's definitely worth reading in that case.
Yeah. All right. So, and we will definitely have to come back and do more Zelazny because it's just always so much fun. But yeah, I think for now we're going to wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Tom Gerencer and Rajan Khanna about the novel Roadmarks by Roger Zelazny. So thanks, everyone, so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Tom Gerencer and to Rajan Khanna for joining us on the show. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.